Ladies and gentlemen, it is my extreme pleasure and honor to welcome Dr. and Rabbi Mordechai Finley.
So how y'all doing? Do you all know the person you're sitting next to, behind, in front of? So I'll just take, if you don't know the person sitting next to you, behind you, I'll just take a moment and introduce yourselves to each other. Abraham. Ira, how are you? Well, it's a true honor to be here. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Jason and I will talk about Rabbi Dangerfield in just a moment. It's a really great honor to be here. This is arguably the finest synagogue in the United States, and uncontestedly, under the leadership of the finest rabbi in the United States. I squeaked it at number 49. Rabbi Wolke, of course, is number 1. So it's truly, really a real honor to be here. I'm going to say a few things tonight. I'm going to do a little bit of background, a little bit of theory, and a few skills. And at this point in my life, I realized that people need very clear skills on how to make relationships better. It is true that the happiest people are married. The question is, which marriage? First, second, or third? So the fact that at least half of marriages end in divorce, you realize that something happened between the first marriage and the second marriage. Now, it may be that people are happier in the second marriage, but the first question I have is, what happened in the first one? Why did they choose so badly? Could they have done anything different? And what are they doing right now? So my years of counseling, one thing I realized is, as I'm not a trained psychologist, by the way, I'm not a psychologist. I think my expertise is in what we call Musar, Jewish spiritual psychology. And let me share with you a core difference. One thing I've noticed with my friends who are therapists is they often try to find deep explanations for things. And people, unless it's a talented person who just has a feel for getting people better quickly, in looking for explanations for things, there's oftentimes a focus on feelings. So therapists will say, well, how do you feel? How do you feel? How do you feel? In fact, I'm married, divorced, and remarried, and when my first marriage ended, I was a graduate student at USC, and I went to see I'd never been in therapy, I'd heard about therapy, so I'll just go see a therapist. Like people say, go through divorce, see a therapist. Went down to the student counseling center, and the person said, well, how do you feel? I said, well, I feel horrible. I got 2 little boys, and I feel like a failure, and how come I had chosen so badly, and it's just really an abject, awful experience. She said, well, how do you feel about that? And I thought, well, I just told you how I feel, and I repeated again, and then she asked me again how I felt about it. I realized, well, she's a first-year student, has exactly one question in her quiver. And I realized, in discussing how I felt worse. The more I talk about how I felt, the worse I felt. So that was one indication for me. At the same time, in studying Jewish spiritual psychology, it's very different from what I'll call a classic therapeutic approach. Because we have the idea, going back to the book of Genesis, is that human beings are created with both a lev, which is mistranslated as heart, and neshama. Why mistranslated? When you use the word heart in English, you think of the seat of moral intuitions. What do we say in English? Follow your heart. What does the Torah say? Lo taturu acharei levavchem. Don't follow your heart. That's what it says in the Torah. It also says in the Torah, chapter 6, verse 5, it says, when God is reflecting on the horrid nature of the human condition, God reflects up to God's self and says, Kol yetzer machshavot libo rak kol hayom. All of the yetzer, from the Hebrew word litzor, which means a shape or form, all of the shape or form, machshavot libo, the thoughts or calculations of his lev, rak kol hayom, all bad, all day long. Okay? So the word lev in Hebrew doesn't mean heart in the sense of follow your heart. It's what we would call what I call the ego self. The part of you that is ritual, habitual, does things on automatic pilot, filled with assumptions, and very much rooted in your point of view, not an objective point of view, not an empathetic point of view, but your point of view. So the ego self, on most things, does pretty well. Okay? So you have a job, you get here tonight, you get up, you brush your teeth, you get dressed. Most people, once you're depressed or have a disorder, you go through life pretty well. I'll tell you one thing the ego self is absolutely not prepared for, is the complexity of human relationships. So people go to high school, go to college, they study all kinds of complex things. People don't teach the complexity of human relationships and some very, very simple ways that you can make relationships better. And I want to share that with you tonight, a few ideas and then a few skills. I wish I had time to share with you the 30 or 40 skills that I teach people. Maybe tonight I'll just be able to share 2 or 3. So let me start out with a metaphor. So one of my favorite jokes in the whole world is the guy who calls his friend and says, I'm going to end it all. I'm having a terrible time. My marriage is bad. My job is bad. My kids won't talk to me. I'm gaining weight. I'm out of shape. It's hard for me to breathe. I'm going to end it. So he says, well, what are you going to do? He said, well, the worst thing I have in the house is a bottle of 1,000 ibuprofen. I'm going to take every single one of them and end my life. And the friend is desperate. And he gets in his car. And the guy lives a couple hours away. He finally gets there. He pounds the door down. The guy comes in. His friend is sitting there perfectly fine. He says, what happened? He says, well, after the first 4 I actually felt a lot better. So when I think about people who struggle, you see, what I don't say is, how'd you get the headache? What's the background of the headache? What I want to say is, take a couple ibuprofen. So I'm going to share with you what I'm going to call, first of all, theory of first aid. When you're in a tough time with your spouse or your child, there are certain things that you do and do not do, and I'll tell you why. So, in order. Whenever there's a struggle in a relationship, what many people insist on doing is presenting their point of view and unconsciously winning the argument, winning the situation. And the way they go, and why do people do that? Most people I know whom I counsel, both of them are pretty smart, both pretty successful. And both in their lives are oftentimes the answer person. People go to them. They're the employer, they're the boss, they're the smart person on the team. We're the smart people on the team. So their life experience is, I'm smart. That's one thing they know for sure, and they are smart. The second thing they know for sure is that they're good. So I deal with people that are good people and smart people, and therefore their assumption about the world is, I can solve this problem. I'm a good problem solver. And the problem is the other person, the spouse or the child. But the other person is thinking the exact same thing. I'm good, I'm smart, I'm a problem solver, and you're the problem. So what happens is they battle each other on who is the problem. And that's when the arguments begin. Now with children, it's a different thing. Parents see their child as a problem. You don't do your homework, you're lazy, you don't clean the room, you are a problem. I will solve this problem. But the way I'm going to solve this problem is just tell you what to do and make your life so miserable at the end, you will submit to my authority and do what I'm telling you to do. Okay? So the parent sees the child as a problem. So one thing I know, people that are smart people, good people, successful people, have horrible habits. In fact, the book that I'm writing to put all this into good order is called Good People, Bad Habits. And one thing I know is very early in my counseling, so 30 years ago, I would listen to people, and the way they would talk to people was as if they were prosecuting them. In fact, I remember one man, he was both an accountant and an attorney, and very rigid guy, very full of himself, very sure that he was right. And he married a woman who was, for lack of a better term, more on the spiritual, aesthetic, artistic side. And he comes to me and says, the rabbi, she says she's going to be to pick up the kids at 3, and she's always late, and I never know what she's doing, I never know, this is before cell phones, I never know where she is, I never know what's happening with her. And I'm listening to him, and he goes on and on about all, and other imperfection, and she's feeling crushed. And he said, as he gets louder and more angry, he says, well, what do you think I should do? What do you think I should do? I said, take her out and shoot her? And he goes, well, not that far, but I'm so glad you understand. And that's what he was talking about. He was saying such horrible things in my presence. I thought to myself, this man is so smart, and probably a really good manager, and he's an awful human being. An awful human being. So that's when I laid into him. I said, excuse me, if this were my daughter, if this were my sister, I would be furious at you. She's not my daughter, she's not my sister, she's a human being. I said, how dare you speak about another human being in my presence like that? How dare you? And I guess the first time someone said to him, how dare you? You're hurting her. For what purpose? So that's when I realized that sometimes when people get into these situations, their goal is not to solve, their goal is not to make it better, their goal is to punish. There's a fascinating insight that I had, that when you hear people talking, good people, smart people, their unconscious goal is to punish. Not everybody. But I think we as human beings, the way that we, on an evolutionary psychological perspective, if we do not have the ability and the drive to punish, we can never defend ourselves. Try to imagine a tribe of people that were nonviolent and never wanted to punish. They'd be wiped out. Their genes wouldn't make it down through the evolutionary scale. So those of you who have a little bit of temper, you get angry, you're punitive, you're the warriors of that tribe. Those genes came down for a purpose. Nothing wrong with you if you have a bit of a temper, if you have a need to punish. There's nothing wrong with you genetically. There's something wrong with you morally if you allow yourself to do it. You understand? I mean, spiritual psychology begins with the state of human nature. Right? That's our genetic inheritance. Some folks are passive, some folks are aggressive. Some folks have a temper, some people are guilt-ridden. Your genetic nature is an accident of your family tree. What you do with it is your moral responsibility. So because I consider myself, and my expertise is in spiritual formation, meaning we're going to form the ego self around the higher self, and moral psychology. The way I understand psychology, its core goal is to make us virtuous people, to make us moral people. So let's go back for a moment into that struggle. Because it's the high holidays and the month of Elul, it's a time of both forgiveness and a time of rebuke. So I want to focus on something that is actually applicable to high holidays. Now, the Torah says, by the way, in the line where it says, love your neighbor as yourself, let me actually give you the fuller verse. It says, do not hate your brother in your heart. Lo tisnach et achicha b'levacha. Do not hate your brother, your relative, in your ego self. The higher self doesn't know hatred. The ego self knows it very well. And then it says, you shall surely rebuke him. Sounds strange. In order not to hate him, you must rebuke him. Why? Because if you don't get rid of that resentment, it's going to fester. And you're going to feel deep hatred. And by the way, the hatred I'm talking about happens between spouses and children. You know how I know? I hear they talk to each other. I hear they talk to each other. Sometimes when I hear spouses talk in front of me, they talk like they hate each other. Sometimes when I hear parents talk about their children, they have an argument, they talk with hatred. Now, if we took a long step back, I say, do you love your spouse? Do you love your child? Yes. Listen how they talk. Ever catch yourself in a bad moment? When you're really letting someone have it, your spouse or your child? If we had a recording of how you sounded, oftentimes one of the two sounds, you feel with disgust and revulsion at that other people. People say the worst things to each other. So that line that says, you shall surely rebuke them, says, if you don't learn how to correct another person, you're going to end up hating them in your heart. So it says, you shall surely rebuke them. And if you don't rebuke them, you bear their sin. If you don't straighten somebody else out, it's your sin. So the Torah very much wants us to point out the errors of other people. And then it says, lo titor, don't hold grudges. Lo tikom, don't extract vengeance. Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, but rather love your reah as yourself. What's a reah in Hebrew? When it really says ra'yati, what does that mean? My wife. A reah doesn't mean your neighbor. How many people know your neighbors really well? No hands? Okay. Why? So neighbor sounds like some anonymous person in the world. You know what reah means? It means your wife, your husband, the person living in your home. It's easy to love humanity. It's very difficult to actually love the people in your home consistently because we get so angry at each other. We get so disappointed at each other. So that's what I see. I see good people, smart people, that under stress with their husbands, with their wives, with their children, with their family, they treat each other in horrid ways. Now, I'm going to guess, in this room, a large number of you, the worst hurt that you carry in your life is from someone who is supposed to love you better. Something your parents said, your spouse said, your sibling said or done, your child said. Most of you, if we scratch the surface and ask what was the most painful moment in your life, you will probably go back to an experience of someone who's supposed to love you better. It's not that we don't love each other, we just have terrible habits. This is what I've discovered in my 30 years on the pulpit. So I've devoted my life, for all my scholarly qualifications, I teach Talmud and Midrash and all this stuff. I'm glad to teach it. Students are interested in it. You know what I really care about? I care about improving the quality of your day-to-day lives in your homes. That's what I care about. Let's go back to rebuke. Our tradition says, great is the generation that can take rebuke. Greater is the generation that can give it. Greater is the generation that can give rebuke. So I'm going to compress my talk tonight in how to rebuke. How to rebuke, how to reprove, point out the errors in another person. To rebuke means to point out the errors of another person. Now I want you to think about it for a moment. Someone has wronged me. My wife does something I don't like, one of my 4 kids, somebody in the jiu-jitsu studio, someone in the congregation, one of my students at the school, a colleague of mine. This all happened. I've gotten upset at everyone at the one time or another. And I want to say something. So here's the first thing that I do. Instead of asking myself how I feel, I ask myself, what exactly happened? What exactly happened? Give you an example. A woman comes into me, a couple's about to get divorced. I talk to the husband, I get him calm, I have the wife come in. I say, what's going on? She says, he doesn't respect me, he doesn't love me. I say, what happened? Well, it's been 15 years. I said, tell me one thing that happened. One thing. Well, it's too much. I said, one thing. You're getting a divorce, can I hear one thing? Last summer when he was in Israel, he wouldn't even talk to me. So what I'm hearing is, you were there, he was here. I said, I don't know if that means he wouldn't talk to you. Did you try to call him? Yes, I called him and he wouldn't talk to me. I say, so what you're saying is you called, he picked up the phone and was silent. She said, no, of course I don't mean that. I said, lady, I really don't know what happened. Could you just tell me what happened? She says, well, yeah, he picked up the phone, but then he said he couldn't talk. As usual, he's at his parents' house and they come first. I said, what happened? What did he say? What exactly did he say? He said he didn't want to talk about stuff in front of his parents. I thought, sounds reasonable. But she said, no, but that's not what I'm talking about. And she goes on to something else. And every time I try to get her, what happened? She was so filled with her feelings that every time I got her down to what happened, she jumped to something else. Why? Because she needed to find something that matched her feelings. Listen to that. What happens with people is they have strong feelings, very strong feelings, and they need to massage the facts to match the feelings. So if you feel really hurt, I have to describe what you did in the most egregious terms. I'm counseling a couple where she says to me the following. It comes down to something like this. By the way, it's the same music. Listen to yourself. Here's the music. Okay. There I was, sitting down, reading a book, minding my own business. My husband rushes into the room and says, where are my keys? He always loses his keys, and he expects me to come and save him because he just can't care of himself. I said, okay, what happened? Well, I just told you. I said, no adjectives, no adverbs, and no music. No, that's music. No music. She said, well, I was sitting having tea. I said, too much background. My husband asked me where his keys were. All right. Say it again. Well, my husband couldn't find his keys. He asked me where they were. We'll say it one more time. Okay. I said, now, what did you say? Well, like I said, I'm sitting here having my tea and you're always losing. I said, okay, all right, so now that you realize your husband couldn't find his keys, what could you have said? Let me help him. She could have said that. No, why didn't she? Because she had a story in her head. He burst into the room and he asked for the keys, and so the whole thing is she's such a victim. Her life is so horrible, she's such a bad person. So the first thing I say to people is, you want to give it to somebody, the first thing you do is you catch yourself and say, what exactly happened? No adjectives, no adverbs, no music. What happened? Put it into like 2 sentences, 2 plain sentences. No semicolons, non-complex sentences. No conditional sentences, simple, straight declarative sentences. What happened? Half of my counseling practice is getting people to tell me what happened. You understand? Half of the time I spend with people is, what happened? I don't want to know how you feel. I don't want the background. I want to know what happened. You know why people can't do it? Because they're invested in the narrative, which makes the person the aggressor, makes them the victim, gives them the moral high ground, and licenses them to lay that person out. I said, okay, so what's your goal? Here's the second thing. First of all, what just happened? That's number one. Number two, what's my goal here? My husband can't find his keys. Okay, that's very simple. What is your goal in this conversation? They say, well, okay, Rabbi, I have to let him have it so that he doesn't do it again. Right? I am morally in charge of my husband. God put me on this earth to make sure that my family lives under my moral rule, and I will point out all their errors to them, and I will grind them into the ground until they do it my way. I said, okay, and how's that going for you? How's it going? Well, they don't listen to me. I said, so what do you do? Well, I do it again. I said, you know, there's something that says that, and it's not working. Stop doing it. Because it's not working. So I had this one guy who I'm counseling, and he's been criticizing his kids for 20 years. So I'm brought in for family counseling, and these guys are in their 30s and 40s, and they really had it. So I hear him, he's always criticizing and ruining their lives. They criticize ruining their lives. I said, okay, let me talk to the dad. So I talked to the dad, very successful, wealthy man, well into his 70s. I said, what's your theory? He says, Rabbi, if I don't correct them, they won't know how to live. I said, how often do you correct them? At least twice a week. Is it working?
No.
Well, if I wouldn't do it, it would be worse. I said, what's your evidence for that? Do you have any evidence? I said, can I tell you what you remind me of? You remind me of a guy with a leaky roof and has exactly one tool in his tool belt called a hammer. He says, I only have a hammer, so I'll just keep hitting the leak. Right? And he says, well, what else can I do? I said, you're seriously asking me? If you're asking rhetorical, I don't want to get into it, because we're just going to argue. Take the hammer out of the tool belt, and I'll give you the other tool. But you know what people feel? I only have a hammer. It's my best tool. It's the one that I use the most. I know how to use it. I will only use that one. I say, I can only talk to you if you take the hammer out of your tool belt. Because the other tool is going to be so obvious to you. So obvious to you, you're going to be embarrassed. I said, what's your goal? I want to change their behavior. I said, have you ever taken the time to get inside their head and ask, what is their train of thought that has produced that behavior? You can reprimand someone and tell them not to do it. That's just called being bossy. Or you can say, and this is what I recommend to parents, by the way, I have a whole section on parents. A child does something wrong, don't come in and tell them off. Say, here's what I try to do. I have two hats. Life coach hat, and I have authoritarian hat. I say, you're not in trouble. There has to be a consequence because he did something wrong, so I have to do the authority thing. But the first thing I want to be is your life coach. So I want to understand. Give me your train of thought all the way up until the moment when. Okay, Daddy, I'm sorry. I said, I'm actually not interested in it. What I want to understand is, and this is from love, I'm not going to punish you. If there's some kind of punishment, I'll come back in tomorrow and tell you what that is. Life of them, unfortunately, is not at stake. What I want to understand is, what was your train of thought where the thing that came out next was disrespect the teacher? Just want to understand. And they share what's going on in the classroom, and the teacher's annoying, and the teacher just, they have a whole thing. And I say, thanks, got it. And I leave the room. I say, thank you. Because you know, when most people say, why did you do that? And the kid starts to say, why, what did his parents say? I don't care why. Don't do it. The kid thought, wow, I thought they actually were interested in my life for a half a second there. One thing I say to parents is, actually be serious about why. Because you really want to help a child, have them understand how their own mind works. How all this impetus, all this input created that decision, which on almost every perspective was the wrong decision. How can the kid get better if you just tell them not to do it? If they knew, they already know not to do it. They already know that it was wrong. They just don't know how they got there. So the question is, what's the goal? You want your spouse to stop something, you want your child to stop something, and you just tell them off, I almost guarantee you you're going to be back in the same place. Why? Because the ego self is habitual and ritual. Most of the argument between couples is habitual. The same argument over and over and over again. Are you familiar with that? Does that sound familiar? It's the same argument over and over again. In fact, there are some couples they think I'm some kind of clairvoyant because they begin with the first 2 minutes. I say, you guys both stop, I'll just do both sides. Now, why can I do that? Because it's actually not psychological. It's the human condition. I know both sides of the argument. It starts with, why didn't you pick up the broccoli? Well, yeah, but you always forget. If your mother asked you, you remember. Why are you bringing my mother into it? I'll tell you why you bring me. Actually, don't bring my. No, I will tell you. So, like, they say 2 sentences. I say, you guys stop. I'll just do the whole thing. Because they're all the same. Once I hear 2 sentences, I know which out of the 5 archetypes to put them in. And I say, do you really want to know why I didn't get the broccoli? No. Then why are you asking him? It's a setup to punish him. That's what comes out within half an hour. I say, okay, what's your goal? To punish? Or to get the broccoli? What's your goal? Because you know, folks, unconsciously the goal is to punish. So that's why, once you find out, okay, what exactly happened? And before I open my mouth, what is the goal? Once you discover that your goal is to punish, to let somebody have it, to humiliate them, to embarrass them, or to persuade them that you're right and they're wrong. If you want to embarrass, punish, humiliate, or persuade, don't talk. Now the persuasion thing sounds crazy. What, I can't try to persuade them? I'll say, here's why you don't. Here's why you don't. Because after you ask yourself, what exactly happened in simple sentences? That's the first skill. I want you all to try this. Before you say anything, say, what just happened? Second thing is, now before I talk, what's my goal here? Third thing, you ask yourself, not what they did. The next thing is, what need of mine was not met? This is hard. What need of mine was met? So, by the way, I actually had the broccoli counseling session. Because the wife says, my husband this, my husband this, my husband this. I said, can you just give me one example? Okay, yesterday, didn't pick up the broccoli. I said, okay, so got it down to the simple sentence, took 20 minutes. Got it down to, he didn't pick up the broccoli. When I asked him to, I said, okay, I understand you asked him to, we wouldn't be talking. He didn't pick up the broccoli. Now, what's your goal here? Well, he has to understand, I said, stop right there. When you start with, somebody else has to understand, that's not going to go anywhere. Does that sound strange? But if you start with, they must understand, they're actually a separate human being with a separate life, with their own thoughts. And if you start with, I will batter you into understanding, well, from my perspective, that just leads to acrimony. Ask yourself what you want. What behavior you want. This is the next thing. What exactly happened? What's my goal? What need of mine was not met? So, for example, I need him to remember the stuff that I asked him to get. I said, okay. Now, what do you want that's a behavior that I can see? Don't say, respect me, understand my needs, love me more than this, but I don't want big stuff. I want behaviors that I can see. Don't try to talk about his inner life. What do you actually need? Okay, I want him to remember stuff better. Okay? So that's my need. I want him to remember stuff that I get. I say, okay, now let me ask you this, the following. Once you know what your need is, now ask yourself how to bring it to him. Here's one thing I can guarantee you. At least half of the time, people have a different memory of what happened from yours. So you start with, you forgot the broccoli. He oftentimes says, you never mentioned the broccoli. Is that right?
Correct.
And then person 1 says, you're lying. Person 2 says, I'm lying. What about last Thanksgiving when you blah, blah, blah. Oh, you want to go to Thanksgiving? Let's go to Passover 3 years ago, right? And the next thing you know, we're going back to like the embryonic state of, of human misery. I say, guys, just, what do you want? Don't try to redo the past. What do you want from here? I want him to remember stuff. Okay, so he forgot the broccoli. I needed to remember stuff I asked him to do. It may be that I never asked him. Now this is really hard, but this is a high holiday kind of a thought. Assume you might be wrong. Okay. Write that as a sign upon your head and frontlet between your eyes. I might be wrong. What do people do? They start with the sing-song, the victim narrative. Then they come to the person with their assumptions all intact, and they lash out with the goal, oftentimes unconscious, to punish. I said, okay, just stop all that. What happened modestly? What exactly did they do? What need wasn't met? And before you open your mouth, make sure your goal is reconciliation, and you start with, I might be wrong. Now try to imagine the worst arguments in your life if someone started that way. So once you do this, then the next thing is, we can push a little bit further. From a moral, rational perspective, what great moral rule did they break? What great moral rule did they break that accounts for your theory? You know who I really hate, I'm mad at? Hamas, ISIS. But when you're upset with your spouse or kids, you act as if they're Hamas or ISIS. That's what I see. People explode. I say, what did they do? They forgot the broccoli. I said, you're talking like they just blew up a restaurant in Jerusalem. I said, calm down. No one died here. They forgot the broccoli. Well, I feel disrespected. I said, what did they do? Don't know how you feel. What did they do? They forgot the broccoli. I said, okay, do you understand that your emotions are here? What they did is down here. You're not being rational. Because rationality means that what you're doing fits the facts. So if you decide, I'm going to be rational, I'm just going to be a rational person, I will make sure that my feelings match the facts. Rob, okay. I had this one dad, they're getting ready to go, and the dad says to the kids, where's the shoes? Now these 7-year-old boys, so 7 and 9, they can't find the shoes. The dad loses it. I just bought you those shoes, they're $100 shoes, and you're always losing your money. And they just screaming at his kids. And the wife finally says, okay, I've had enough. Either you stop or I'm leaving you, because you have these anger attacks all the time. So I get the dad in there. I said, so what happened? Well, they lost their shoes. I said, okay, one sentence. Okay, my children, 7, 9 years old, lost their shoes. I said, and your reaction is to lose it. I said, let me just, from a rational, theoretical perspective, how many little boys lose their shoes? All of them. All of them. See, if you take the word child, included in the word child is lose their shoes. All children lose their shoes. So if all children lose their shoes, you're acting as if like they're the first person and kids in the history of the universe to do something so egregious as misplace their shoes. I said, act rational. Your kids lost their shoes. Calm down. What does a good dad do? Help them find the shoes. What do? If any other man spoke to your children like you speak to your children, what would you do? He said, I want to kill them. I said, that's exactly right. I said, you're not a fit father. You think you are? You're destroying those little boys. You're destroying those little boys with your anger. You could be a really chill dad and say, kid, daddy, we lost our shoes. And they're just already afraid to go into the okay, have the whole time. Every kid, I lost my shoes. Every kid loses their shoes. Let me help you out. Can you imagine the memory those children will take through life? As opposed to, if we ever let our dad know we forgot our homework, we lost our shoes, we did, every time their dad finds a fault, he goes crazy on them. And I said to them, if any other person did this to your children, right, you would want to kill them. But you permit yourself, now just explain that to me. Explain to me that you permit yourself something that any other person, you would want to destroy them. He had no explanation. So the first thing I said is moral rationality. Assess your feelings and ask yourself, are my feelings moral and rational? Rational means they fit the events, and moral meaning, what's your goal here? So this guy was out of control. So the first thing, moral rationality. So remember the first thing, what exactly happened? What exactly happened? What is my goal here? I might not be right. Analyze things from a more rational perspective. What's going on here? What's at stake? You know a lot of parents don't realize what's at stake? I'll give you a rabbi's perspective. Rabbi's perspective, I had these funerals. When I was a junior rabbi at Stephen West Temple, right, I was at the lowest guy in the totem pole, so I oftentimes got the overflow funerals, which means not the members, but the sisters, the brothers, the uncles, the aunts. And there were times, folks, when I did 10 funerals in a week. Sometimes 4 in one day. So in my 5.5 years there, I probably wrapped up a few hundred funerals. I sat in people's homes. That's what I said to people. I don't want to make a fool of myself out there. Tell me the truth, and we'll put a good shine on it. But you tell me the truth. I said, okay. Dad was a jerk. Dad was a jerk. He never told us he loved us. Always had a temper. Always disappointed in us. I said, okay, what do you want me to say? Well, he was a good provider, hard worker, always there. I said, okay, we'll do that. But can I just tell you guys something? Don't repeat it. Don't you guys do it. How many funerals I sat and I listened to the family talking, and I thought to myself, if that person would have lived their life in preparation for this meeting, they would live their life differently. So I say to everybody, live your life in preparation for the funeral, your funeral meeting, where the rabbi comes and talks to your family. You can't control the situation after you're dead, but you can control it now. You live your life in preparation for that meeting. I have witnessed so many abysmally wasted lives because people would say to themselves, wait a minute, what just happened? What's my goal here? I might be wrong. From a moral rational perspective, are my feelings out of line? If so, don't talk until they come down to a rational perspective. And then what I call the deep truth of the matter. I'm not giving too much information. The deep truth of the matter is, you know what's at stake? Parenting. You think what's at stake is they didn't take the trash cans out, they lost their students into their homework. What you're asking yourself is the holy vocation of being a parent. We're not talking about the deeply spiritual stuff. Some little lives been placed in your care. They only have one chance at this. You're going to judge them, condemn them, harass them for their resume? Is that what you're doing? You're creating a resume? Are you parenting the soul of that child? Are you teaching them how to have insight, moral reflection, how to have loving relationships? You know what I've discovered? Tragically, most parents raise children to fill out a resume. AP, community service. You know what parents don't do? Explain to me how you feel, and I'm not going to judge you. So when a kid says, I hate my sister, mom says, oh, don't say that. I said, she hates her sister. Oh, Rabbi, she doesn't really. I said, hold on a second. She says she hates her sister. What you're saying is, I forbid you to have those feelings, or at least don't tell me. I mean, what are you teaching your kid? Okay, you hate your sister. What did your sister do? She did the following. Okay, so I get it. Now what does the parent do? So what happened? What's your goal with your sister? From a moral, rational perspective, maybe the word hate is too strong. They go, yeah, the word hate is too strong. You see, I say to parents, what I'm telling you, that's the gift you can give your kids. That's the gift you can give a spouse. Your spouse is really angry at you, say, honey, what happened? You don't love me. You don't want to say, honey, what happened? They say, what happened? You say, can I share with you something that you're not going to like? That's not what I remember. Now, I could be wrong. Can I just share with you what I remember? As opposed to, how dare you, and launch back. Because you know what the goal is when your spouse is upset? Calm them down. Try to create moral rationality. Get to the truth of the matter. Because here's the deep truth about marriages. The deep truth about marriages is when you meet each other, love each other, marry each other, you found someone to love you until the day of your death. That's exactly what Jason said was exactly right. We don't want to be alone. You fall in love and you say, we don't say these words, but you say something like, I've chosen you to be my partner until I die. I'm putting my life in your hands. The quality of my life depends on how good of a person you want to be, and I'll try to be a good person too. And then people batter each other. And I say to people, there's a holy vocation here. Caring for the soul of another human being until one of you dies. And the survivor says, I was the luckiest person in the whole world. That's your goal. So every time something comes up, you say to yourself, what's the deep truth of the matter here? Someone has chosen me to do this journey with him until one of us dies. This is a holy, deep thing. You know, that's what I do with Shabbos candles in our home. When my wife is lighting candles, that's what I think. She's chosen me to be her partner until one of us dies. I look at my children. I think to myself, they got one chance at this child, but they want to be the best dad I can. I don't want to harass them and condemn them. So the first thing is, to compress all this, the moral rationality. What exactly happened? What's my goal here? I might be wrong. Do my feelings fit the facts? And then the deep truth of the matter. What is the deep truth behind all of this? The holy background to all of this. And the last thing I want to share with you is the ultimate goal is shalom. The ultimate goal is wholeness. The wholeness of the self. The wholeness of our personality. The wholeness of our relationships. 3 Hebrew words. Din, rationality, good judgment. That's the first part. Emet, the deep truth of the situation. Shalom, where we're heading all this. Now Rabbi Dangerfield. So Rabbi Dangerfield, he has this humor by being a cynic. So he says, Well, we fight on vacation. We fight whenever we go. So I'll save the marriage by avoiding each other. We all recognize it as humorous, but you know, it makes me want to cry. You know, there's some sitcoms that I can't stand. You know the sitcoms where they're married with children, is that the one? Is that it? I couldn't watch it. I watched it for 5 minutes, I couldn't watch it. Because it was based on meanness. Yeah, it was funny, you know, knock them up, you know, set it up, knock it down, set it up. Yeah, I couldn't watch it. He said to me, well, you like Sopranos? I said, because Sopranos at least admits that it's evil. Okay? I don't laugh when Tony Soprano acts evil. I'm not going to laugh at Married with Children because it's almost as evil the kind of stuff that people do. So Rodney Dangerfield says, isn't it funny? We fight when we go out on dates, we fight during vacation, we fight at home. Ha ha ha, it's so funny. I actually don't think it's funny, probably because I feel like an emergency room doctor. That's not funny to me. I don't think it's cute. I don't think it's charming the way that people batter each other. So here's the thing I want to leave with you guys tonight. We're coming up on the high holidays. It says rebuke. Before you open your mouth and rebuke anybody, ask yourself, what happened? What's my goal here? Maybe I'm wrong. Do my feelings fit the facts? What's the deep truth back there? You know what I find out? 95% of what I want to say to my wife, I don't say. You know what really bothers me? She says the exact same thing. I said, what, 95% you don't say? Yeah, I don't say. That's not worth it. I go, wow. At first I was upset about it. I thought, yeah, I can be an annoying, irritating guy. And she looks and she says, is it worth it? So, you know, I leave stuff everywhere around the house. It's like a, you know, like just, I need to leave traces of my existence. So, you know, she's, clean up the books and clean up, you put your shit in. And so, you know, we've learned, she might say to me, I noticed you left some books out. And I say, oh wow, I'm so sorry, done. Or she could do like from 20 years ago and say, how many times have I told you? Well, what about what you do? That's what we used to do 20 years ago. And then we both learned, that's becoming. So, I noticed you left your shoes out. Oh my God, I'm so sorry, honey. That's all I had to do. What exactly happened? I left the books out, left the shoes out. Or we could start hitting on each other. So we learned a long time ago, if we keep at it, it's called killing a married by 1,000 slashes. Every little bit of criticizing, complaining, condemning, pointing out error, every time you do that, it's a slash. So I say to people, back off from all of that. So during this time of the year, Elul, talk less. Talk less. Think about what exactly you need to say. Do you need to say it? And what's the best way to get what you want? And realize there's another soul there in your home, trudging its way to its death. And they're going to ask, what were you like? And my prayer for all of you is you are good people, smart people with good habits. Thank you. Okay.
Questions? Yeah, we have time for a few questions.
It's on. Is it on?
No. Yes. Thank you for an outstanding
I can hear you.
Mic.
I'll repeat the question.
Really, thank you for an outstanding presentation. Very, very insightful, very, very helpful. I think not many people are as evolved as you are, that we can kind of not take our feelings into consideration.
I'll repeat the
I
question.
think that it was given from a very male perspective, and as a female, I have to say I'm trying to be already the way that you described we should be, but women are much more into feelings, and can you give us some tools as women to manage
so
that?
the question is, women are more into feelings. You know what I have found is that men rage incredibly. It's all filled with feelings. Now, there are some couples where one rages and one gets hurt. So if you mean by feelings, do women get hurt more than men?
No, I mean, for example, you said that about respect, for example. Women have, or men and women, have the need to be respected. And you said, don't talk to me about that. How can you not take that into
thank you for the question.
consideration?
So the woman doesn't feel respected by her husband. Okay, and she has feelings that he doesn't respect her. So how does that go? You walk up to the man and you say, I don't feel you respect me. Now, what's the guy going to say? What do you think the next word out of his mouth is going to be?
respect you.
Yes, I do respect you. Problem solved. Right? She goes, oh, just want to make sure. She walks away, right? Is that what happens? No, of course it doesn't happen. So I'm not saying the woman shouldn't feel disrespected. I'm saying it's just not going to work. See, I've sat there for hours, for 30 years, asking myself, what works? When a woman says, you don't respect me, the man always says, yes, I do. No, you don't. Yes, I do. Like ping pong. And then they blow up about something. And then I finally say, honey, can you tell me what happened? What happened, mister? What happened? What happened? And then she tells me what happened. They went out to dinner, and he was looking at everybody but her. I said, okay. So, didn't look at you once?
Valid. I mean, it's valid.
Well, let's get to the fact. Did he look at you once? Yes, he looked at me a couple of times. I said, if I had a camera, I'm trying to get to the facts. What percentage did he look at you and not at you? 10% at me, 90% at everybody else. I said, okay, and that's why you feel disrespected. Yes. I said, I'm going to give you a thought experiment. Can you imagine another woman sitting back and watching her husband manage this group of people masterfully, just watching him and enjoying herself and feeling how he worked the room? Can you imagine, she said? Yeah, I can imagine. I said, so it's not the fact that he didn't look at you. The question is what you're bringing to the table. So first of all, we'll talk about your husband next. But there's a structure of your personality that you need affirmation. Now you need to own that. Now you can talk to your husband and say, not, you don't care about me, you don't respect me, you don't look at me. You can say, honey, I need to bring something up. Sure. Remember the dinner last night? Yeah. It was my experience, it could be wrong, that you didn't look at me very much. Stop talking. Husband says, well, I look at you. She goes, okay, I don't think you did, but what about next time? Is there some way that I can let you know that I feel you're not paying attention to me? Sure, let's figure out something out. Now, that's the version I prefer. See, she has the wounded feelings, but if she starts with, you're bad, you don't respect me, you're a bad husband, it doesn't go anywhere. So you understand, what I want to do is take this miasma of feelings, I want to say, I'm on your side. I want to be a better man. But if you think the approach is to start with an attack, and name-calling, and attack his character, it doesn't go anywhere. So do it my way. Say, here's how I felt bad. Here's what I think happened, maybe I'm wrong. The man doesn't feel defensive. He goes, well, honey, I don't want you to feel bad, I'll look at it. Okay, now we're done. It took exactly 30 seconds.
So incorporate the feelings into the facts.
Yeah.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
if you could,
Sure.
we got
Okay,
a
one more
bunch
question.
of people.
You understand my approach?
Yes.
Yeah.
Michelle.
Hi.
Yeah.
Okay, I also want to thank you. I echo what was said before. I really appreciate you coming to speak with us, and I learned a lot. I think it's interesting to note that most of what you have expressed as being issues in the relationship have been about a woman's needs not being met. And so I think that should, maybe for your next talk, you might want to pay attention to that in describing maybe some of the male experience.
I'll listen to my tape, thank you.
Sure. I might be wrong though, so. But
You learned.
I think my question is I mean, of course I'm not married, so I don't have that experience, but I get that you can get in a marriage when you're living with someone for a very long time, you might get caught up in the mundane nature of life and fighting over broccoli or fighting over little things that are part of a bigger problem.
Try to get your question, okay, so I can repeat it for people.
I'm sorry. And my question is how do you get from discussing, from discussing kind of the smaller details, the little events that piss people off or hurt people into understanding the greater problem?
Okay, that's a great question. So if I focus on one thing, typically my talks have to do with the counseling that I did this week. They're very fresh. Another week I would have probably brought up different issues. So it sounded like I was latent on one side or the other, which means mean men and wounded women, that's just probably what would happen in my office this week. Another week I could talk mean women and wounded men. It's just the way the week went. Okay, so here's the thing. When people want to talk about big things, it oftentimes turns into an argument, just from my experience. I'm not a theoretician. My evidence is anecdotal, but consistently anecdotal. So you get to the deep things through the small things. So the person who says, you don't respect me. So the same thing with the men, with men, certainly. The woman has some error. Let's say she gets on the phone and talks to her mother more than she talks to him. So he says, you don't respect me, you don't love me, you're always on the phone with your mother. Okay. Now, he could start there. He's probably not going to get a very helpful response because she's been attacked. Okay. And so a lot of men feel they don't get enough love from their wives. I said, or you could start a different way. Now remember, I'm starting with a few assumptions. His tendency not to feel respected, he brought that into the marriage. This is the deeper thing. Okay? So what people end up doing, once I say, okay, what happened? Well, she talked to her mother. Now, when I'm talking to this guy, I may say, so she talked to her mother, and you feel disrespected. Another man might say, how fantastic it is that my wife and her mother are so close. It's not what she did. See, the deeper thing is the man or the woman's tendency to feel unloved, disrespected, uncherished. I'm not saying the spouse is faultless. What I'm saying, they didn't create that tendency. So the deeper thing that I want to get to is the tendencies of each partner, which we get to by dealing with the small stuff, and how each other can be more virtuous. So that's where I've actually helped put marriages back together. For each one to own what they're bringing into it, and each one to own their behaviors mutually, because people typically have a different set of deeper things, which means whatever person one has, person two has a different set. So what I've discovered is by dealing with the small stuff, they learn how to talk. They learn how to say, here's what happened, here's my goal, here's how I felt, maybe I'm wrong, maybe try to be rational. When both master that, then we can get to the deeper stuff. You understand what I'm saying? So remember, I have 50 more things I want to share with you. Tonight I want to do ibuprofen. I just want to help you guys in the month of Elul not make things worse. I'm not giving you my total theory. I'm going to give you steps 1 through 5 of 50 steps. Okay. So I'm sorry I can't do the whole thing, but I think the things I said tonight, if you do what I say, believe me, things will go better. If
We
you
have
just do what I
time
say.
for maybe 1 or 2 quick. Maybe just one.
I'll try to answer shorter too.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, Rabbi.
Yes.
The question I have is, what is it in the human condition, the universal human condition, and you can answer it either from the Torah or however you want, that the human beings, they seem to me to be right, but being right is far more important than being loved, and this seems to be...
Okay, human condition. Remember, the ego self looks for security, stability, and hold the high ground. Now, so there are many people that are typically either aggression-driven or guilt-driven. So the guilt-driven person oftentimes feel that they have to own up to stuff they shouldn't own up to, and the aggressive person oftentimes wants to punish. So when a person comes into my office, they might be anger-driven, resentment-driven, shame-guilt-driven, guilt-driven, anxiety-driven, fear-driven, envy-driven. You see what I'm saying? I don't know what I'm going to see. But of the range of things, what I discover is people need to affirm that precept. So a person comes in and says, you know, I'm always wrong, I'm guilty, and there's resentment underneath that. And I resent them for making us feel this way. Or the shame, meaning I resent them for exposing me. So when a person comes in, I think those are probably the basic seven. Anger and resentment, guilt and shame, fear, anxiety, and envy. That's my first blush. I'm trying to find out what's going on with what. That's just your ego self. That's how you're structured. So if I quiz every person in this room, I would find some of you are anger-driven, some of you are guilt-driven, resentment-driven, some of you are guilt-driven, which means I'm wrong, shame-driven, I'm bad, fear-driven, the things in the world are overwhelming me, anxiety-driven, I'm overwhelmed, but I don't know why, and envy-driven, it's just you can't stand other people's success. So one thing I got to find out is what's driving the person. But see, I don't want to get there. That's for my third talk. Invite me back 3 times, I'll get there, okay? The first thing I want to do is shh. Calm down. Let's solve this one. Not any big words. Learn how to talk. If I can, I'll just add one more sentence to this. You know, when a couple comes in, they're having trouble, I don't bring them in together. I meet with them one by one. And I teach them how to talk. I say, when you come into my office, no criticizing. No complaining, no condemning, accusing, blaming, labeling, no conflict. They go, well, what do we do? I say, I'll show you. But first you must promise me when you walk into my office, no criticizing, no complaining, no condemning, accusing, blaming, or labeling, no conflict. I'll do the rest for you. And when they come in, okay, I might say, what happened? And they start with the same song. I said, no. What happened? They go, oh yeah, I remember. I said, remember we talked? And And you know, when people do that, no criticizing, I call the 4 C's, no criticizing, no complaining, no condemning, accusing, blaming, etc., no conflict, it changes the brain, it changes the way your brain works. And then we can get to the emes, the truth of the matter, and then we get to the deeper stuff. Now that's far down the line. What I want to do tonight was give you some basic skills for getting through the month of Elul and being a virtuous person. That's my goal for tonight. So that's a deep